Today on Paul's Old Crap, we're going to take a look at the power supply for the Macintosh IIci. Now, these power supplies, they're actually quite annoying to deal with. To get this out of the metal casing, like it sits in the metal casing down in like this, so you've got this board here like attached on top of it, and then it's also got this annoying metal on the sides here. So I think to get the actual board out, I had to slide it gently inside there and wiggle it until I could make it out of the case. And while that was annoying enough, then I took a look at the board itself, and the way they built these boards is they covered a lot of the film capacitors, these ones here, with like a rubber material, and these larger capacitors here were also covered in some sort of like protective material. And then on top of that, they also put glue all over the place on all these capacitors here, and then there was more glue over here, and I'm having trouble trying to get a lot of this crap off just because there's hardened glue all over the place. So I will say that this is probably one of the more annoying power supplies that I've had to deal with. But with that being said, this is still a working power supply. I don't believe there's any leakage on the aluminum capacitors that we have here. But I am doing preventative maintenance on this power supply. So I will be replacing all of the aluminum capacitors, and I am also going to replace most of these film type capacitors. So for example, if we take a look at like this one in here. Now the reason I'm replacing these is because these scare me. On my 2GS power supply, it also had these for the line filter capacitors, and I haven't had one of these explode on me yet, but I've heard that if one of these types of capacitors dies and explodes inside the power supply, it releases just like a sticky gunk that gets on everything, and also it makes the whole thing smell extremely bad, and that's a cleaning job that I am not interested in doing. So there's going to be a number of these film capacitors that I replace on this board. I didn't realize this was another one until after I made my order of capacitors, so this one will not be replaced, but I might do that in the future. It was mainly these ones that I was most concerned about, so the ones that have this clear-ish type looking outside to them. So these were the ones I wanted to replace with higher priority. And then the aluminum capacitors, basically I just want to get those done because I don't really want to have to open this thing up again to do repairs on it. So I think what we'll do is we'll start off with desoldering the two large capacitors here and replacing those. So let's get started on that. Alright, so doing this process is pretty easy with just using like the solder or desoldering braid stuff here. We'll take that guy out. Just basically heat up the solder. Try to get it to melt here. Try and get this as clean as I can. Alright, I think that should be enough to remove the capacitor. Let's just wiggle it around. Yeah. So it's basically already coming out of the board. So, yeah. Fairly simple to do, and we'll take a look at the value of this capacitor. This is one of those big ones. There's actually a big sticker covering this one here, but I think you might be able to see it here. So it's the 470 and 200. So we take a look at our replacement. 470, 200, perfect. And we take a look at the board. We've got positive on that side, negative down there. Line it up, drop into place. And then what I do on the bottom is I actually bend down these tabs, kind of, whoops, just using a pair of pliers. There we go. That way it stays in place because I'm not going to actually do my soldering until I've got all the capacitors replaced. So that seems simple enough. I think what we're going to do now is we're going to pull this film capacitor here. So if we take a look at the underside of the board, it's going to be this contact here and that contact there. And all right, so get the solder off the old lead there. That should be enough for that side. All right, I think we're good. Let's take a look at the capacitor. And I think I'll just try to use my pliers here. There we go. So I think these are all going to be rated at 250 volts AC. So the replacement that we're going to be using is this one here. The rating on, I think, some of these new capacitors that I'm using is much higher because I think this is basically what the only availability I could find when I was placing my capacitor order. So this is the 0.22, and this is the same, except this one has like, I think the rating on here is listed as volts DC, but on the part information on DigiKey, it was also listed as at least 250 volts AC, so I'm assuming this will work. I think I used this same type on the 2GS power supply already when I was replacing, I think, almost this exact same capacitor. So I'm not expecting any problems. And the sizing is not quite the same. It's as close as I could find. So when I ordered these ones, I also ordered them with the, made sure they had the longer leads on there, because some of the other ones on the board, I'm expecting that the fit is not going to be quite as good as these two. So there might be some interesting bending of the leads required, and I didn't really want to get too much into that. But so this is pretty much as basic as it comes for these this type of swap. And there's no polarity on these, so you can pretty much just drop them in any way you want. And these line up fairly close, but the capacitor is kind of hitting another component on this one side over here. So you can kind of play with it if you want, like might be able to put that side down first, and then this side will be sticking up a little bit. This is not quite the fit I would have wanted originally, but you know what? As long as it works, that's pretty much the only thing I care about. So I'm sure that'll be good enough, and I'm just bending the leads out of the way. So I'll be doing the rest of the capacitors and then doing the soldering after. So let's see. I think what we'll do next is take a look at some of the other smaller aluminum capacitors. So if we look at the other of the two boards that are in our nice, very convenient setup here. We're going to take out, I think we're going to take out this capacitor right in here. So let's flip this over. And I was using this hole here to kind of line up where I think the capacitor might be, and I'm assuming the leads are right in here. So let's get started. Try and get this iron on there. All right, I think that should be enough. And we'll get the other side there. Actually, I'll just drop this down on the first side again, just to see if there's any other solder. I think we're good. What I try to do is push it hard enough that the leads kind of start moving as I'm pushing the iron on them, just so I know that there's enough movement so I can pull the capacitor out. And in a case like this, because there's a good amount of this lead left and it's bent over, you might want to just pry it upward so it makes removing the capacitor a little easier. And if we take a look at this side again, and then what we'll do is we'll take our pliers, grab the capacitor, and it should just pop right out pretty easily. So if we take a look at the bottom of this capacitor, it looks pretty clean. I'm not really seeing any sign of leakage, so it's quite likely this would still continue to work for potentially a few more years without any problem. But yeah, we might as well just replace them all at the same time as the other types of capacitors anyway. So this is 2200 and 10 volt. And let's take a look here. And we've got here 2200 at 10 volt. Pretty simple. The polarity on the board says the positive is this way, so we line up the negative there, going that way. Drop it into place, and then we'll roll the board over, and I'll just kind of bend these out of the way. So it's fairly straightforward. I would recommend, I was trying to pry some of this glue off these other capacitors, and I still have failed to get all of that stuff off. So what might work is if you have a small heat gun or something, if you can try and get the glue on there to be a little less hard, might make it easier to get off. But at the same time, I'm not too sure what might happen to some of the surrounding components if they get too hot. You don't want to damage any of that stuff. And then you've got this kind of like rubber coating on some of these other capacitors. Like a lot of the components in here, they did have this coating on there, and I've already pulled a lot of it off. But yeah, you can see there's still some of this crap left on here. Anyway, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and pull and replace the rest of these aluminum capacitors, and then we'll see where we're at. Alright, so I've gone through and replaced all of the aluminum capacitors that are in here. There's a couple small ones around, like this one here. I think this is the power on circuit board, if I had to make a guess. So yeah, a little capacitor there, another small one way down the bottom there, and then some larger ones in there. And I did also go through and replace most of the film capacitors on here already. So there's a couple cases where the old capacitor is far bigger than the new one. In a case like this, this is the new capacitor in here, and then the leg, one of the legs, is kind of stretched outward on the bottom there because the size difference is pretty big. And I probably could have done a better job in ordering these capacitors to make sure the new ones were closer fit, but I think there was only limited types that were still available, so I don't know. Yeah, there's another one that's right down in there. Kind of looks a bit crooked because the way the legs bent when I put it in there. So anyway, we're going to, I think we're going to take these last two off here and replace those. So we'll flip this over, and it'll be these there and those ones there. So let's start off with this one. Almost. I think that should be fine. So we'll take a look. And it was this one that we undid. So carefully pull this out with the pliers. And these, they tend to be pretty fragile as well. When I was trying to pull some of these other ones out, like the casing was all cracking and falling apart as I was pulling these out. So yeah, these ones really make me nervous. And the rating on this one is, the way the, I don't know the exact type of rating this is. It says 4700, and then it looks like PF, not UF, like most of the other ones are. So when I ordered the replacement ones, I made sure it was the same rating for that. And the rating on this one is also like higher, I think, than, well, it's got like 630 volt DC, and I think it was also 250 volt AC or higher, and the old one is rated at 250 volt AC. And these ones, I managed to get them in exactly the same size, which worked out good because these ones also had the smaller leads on them, which I don't think I really even noticed until after I received the shipment. So the fact that they are exactly the same size works out good. I don't have to have the legs bent on random directions and trying to fit the small capacitor in the larger spot. So these ones, I think it's just basically a matter of trying to drop it into place while this, what the hell that thing's there, I don't know what it is, but and then we'll just bend the leg a bit so it stays in place. I think that should be fine. Yep, it's not going anywhere. Perfect. All right, so what I'll do is I will desolder the last one, and then we'll proceed with some of the soldering on the capacitors. So for the soldering, it's pretty straightforward. What I use is the this gel type flux, and what we do is we just drop a bunch of it all over the contacts. Some over here, and then we've also got the other one down here. All right, and for solder, I just use whatever this is. It happened to be a cheap, well, whatever the cheapest pricing stuff I could find on DigiKey. Well, I think it's what it was. I don't know, it's like Flux Core or something or other. I'm not really a professional at this, so I have no idea. But yeah, I find that this stuff is easy to do without really needing to understand what you're doing. It's just basically once you practice this enough, it just becomes fairly simple to do. So I think those went in there, not bad. These ones here for the big capacitors, these take a lot more solder. I think that looks good. Yeah, that should be fine. And there's this other one over here. Should be okay. I think I'm probably even using more solder than you really need to, but I don't know. But anyway, what I'll do is I will go ahead and redo the rest of these capacitors. I think once you see it once, you don't really need to see it over and over again. And once I've got all of that soldered up, I guess we'll try to test out the power supply. Okay, so the recapping is complete. I've already clipped all of the leads off, so we've got, well, now we've got a bunch of flux on my hand, but yep, it looks pretty good. Looks like all of the solder points, I think, should do the job. And what I will probably do at some point is go through and place a bunch of glue in here, but I'm going to do that after I verify the power supply actually works. I don't want to be stuck with a bunch of glue on components that I need to replace again, but I do want to have enough glue in here so that none of this stuff is excessively moving around while this power supply is inside the computer. So I think what I'll do is I will try to figure out how to reassemble the power supply again, and then we'll test it out. Okay, so the reassembly of the power supply is actually not too bad. The base of the unit actually does have a couple notches in the board, so when you're placing it in there, you kind of angle one side of it down first, and then the other side, it has a spot that lines up with these metal tabs here, so it'll just kind of like slide in like that and then down. The top piece just sits on top there's of these those metal pieces there, and then screws in place. I'm not gonna reassemble the whole thing, so there's normally a fan right here as well, but I want to test this first and then take it apart again and do the gluing on the components to kind of keep them in the place there. So we're just going to take it as is and drop it into our Macintosh IIci. I think it's in. Oh well. Alright, I will apply power to the power supply. And I will also take my fire extinguisher, and I will have this ready just in case this explodes. So here we go, let's try it out. Well, it seems to be working. I'm hoping that the microphone picked up the audio. And I think it's turned off now. What I'll do is I will pull the power, plug it back in, and we'll try it again. Yep, well I think that looks good. The power LED is on the front, and I can hear the hard drive churning away. Oh, the thing's actually booting off the hard drive right now. But anyway, we're gonna turn it off because I obviously can't see what it's doing with the monitor, and I'm still running this without a fan, so I don't want to have it running too long. But yeah, so this is basically how we recap the power supply in the Macintosh IIci. Like I said earlier in the video, it was a working power supply to start with, but this was basically preventative maintenance. I don't want to have to deal with power supply failures in the future, and I had a lot of spare time this winter, so I'm basically doing recaps of everything. If you've seen my other recapping videos, I do mention that I am not a professional at this. I'm just basically doing this as a hobby, so some of the methods I use might not be what's recommended, but as you can see, it does still work. So I don't think it necessarily requires a whole lot of skill to recap these old machines, but yeah, it's basically something that I recommend anyone do to keep their collection running. So anyway, thanks for watching.